We have our names. Here. I'm always having notes, but I don't.
So good afternoon everybody, and welcome to this panel debate entitled The Art of Peace in the Age of War. A discussion which comes at a time of unprecedented pressure on peace, and is of course is also the case for the MENA region. In the MENA region, we are witnessing persistent conflicts and violence from Libya to Syria, power and security vacuums, but also displacements, economic crisis, food security challenges. They are all increasing, and they are, of course, having a big and huge impact on people and exacerbating social inequalities. And I think that this situation reminds us once again that peace cannot be taken for granted. But it also reminds us that the end of a conflict doesn't mean necessarily that peace, stability, and security are there. At the same time, I think that this reminds us that we cannot tackle these kind of challenges just as business as usual. We need new ideas, new perspectives. We also need to rethink a little bit the traditional approaches. We need a new positive agenda, and this is a little bit the spirit of the Med dialogues. And mostly, we need to put, again, peace at the core of our discussions. I'm Loredana Teodorescu. I'm the president of Women in International Security Italy, which is a global organization dedicated to promote the leadership of women in peace and security. But I'm also the coordinator of the Mediterranean Women Mediators Network, which is a network established by the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, gathering today 60 women from 21 Mediterranean countries. WIDED and Betul are part of that, and is implemented by IAI and WISE Italy. We act on the fundamental premise that women's inclusion in the peace processes is really necessary and important, not only just for an issue of gender equality, but because it means really to pave the way for inclusive society, and it's also a mean to bring to the table different and diverse perspectives. And so let me say that I'm particularly glad to have today this extraordinary panel of women. Women who are contributing actively to peace and security in their own region and countries. And I think that with them we can try to speak about lessons to be learned, and also I would like to ask them to share a little bit of their huge experience. I was talking about the network of women mediators. This is, I think, also a concrete example of a tool of soft diplomacy. We know that in times of war, diplomacy really becomes the other protagonist. We need diplomacy to foster dialogue, to exchange views and interests, to create bridges, to overcome the fractures within the societies, and also to offer alternative solutions to reconcile countries, to prevent and resolve conflicts. And it also, diplomacy becomes also a way to overcome relations which are only based on hard power. So diplomacy has also become more complex if we think that there are many actors working in diplomacy. I mean, not just states, but also international organizations, civil societies, networks of women. This means that we have more tools at our disposal, but at the same time there is more complexity. A diplomacy which needs to be more flexible, agile, needs to adapt to the different situations, and also needs to tackle the origins, the drivers of conflict, which are more and more transnational. This is a little bit the framework of our discussion today. What we would like to discuss is, first of all, what is still threatening peace and security in the MENA region, and how diplomacy can help us to overcome those obstacles and challenges. But we would also like to understand what means does diplomacy have at its disposal today, and how we can also foster a preventive diplomacy, how we can really work in advance to prevent conflicts, because in the end, this is our objective. We don't want conflicts at all. We will reflect on this together with our distinguished panelists of today. Together with me, we had Bouchamaoui, just next to me, member of the Tunisian Dialogue Quartet, which was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2015. And then next to her, Joanna Vronecka, United Nations Special Coordinator for Lebanon. And then Stephanie Williams, United Nations Formal Special Advisor on Libya. And then Ayşe Betül Çelik, Professor of Political Science and Conflict Resolution at Sabancı University in Turkey. What a huge expertise we have here around the table. So Ms. Bouchamaoui Widad, I would like to start with you. As I was saying, you were part of this Tunisian National Quartet, which was really essential in order to lead to the presidential and then legislative elections, and also for the ratification of the new constitution in Tunisia in 2014. So you really played a crucial role for the stability and the democracy in your own country. So drawing on your experience, what lessons can we learn in terms of diplomacy, diplomacy in times of instability? And also, if you look now at the MENA region, at your country, but also, let's say, beyond the borders of your country, what are the main challenges that now are really threatening the peace and stability in your region?
Thank you so much, Diana. I'm so happy to be with you today. And I think it's one of the first panel with just only women. So I'm so happy because, you know, in the National Dialogue in Tunisia, I was the only woman. And for me, I'm always upset because I know we have women everywhere, very powerful women, very competent women. And thank you so much, Loredana, and thank you so much the Italian government for this opportunity to me to speak about my experience as a member of this Tunisian Dialogue Quartet. If I can speak about myself, I'm from the civil society, and it's very important to say that I'm an entrepreneur. My background is the entrepreneurship. My grandfather was an entrepreneur, my father was an entrepreneur, and I'm an entrepreneur, but I'd like to be, as a member of the civil society, an active member of the civil society. Why I say that? Because the civil society in Tunisia is very powerful. The civil society in Tunisia did everything to push for the change in Tunisia and to invite political parties to sit around the table and to discuss together, to sign this roadmap and to define a kind of vision for Tunisia, a strategy for Tunisia. And I think thanks to the civil society, we avoided a civil war in Tunisia. So this is what is very important. Second, I represent women. And I think we do need to have women everywhere. And women, they are the part of the conflict. They are suffering more, I'm so sorry to say that, than men. But they are always in the back office. So I think I'm so happy to have with us two very important women, and you played a big role, and you're still playing a big role in Lebanon, and you played in Libya. And it's very important to have, because I think we can moderate, we can deal with the challenges, and we can also listen to others, we can understand others, and we can find the solution. And that's what we did in Tunisia with this national dialogue. So to be a woman, to represent women everywhere, and to represent the voice of, let's say, mediation, expectation, listening to others, and also how we can accept differences. That's what we have to work on. We need to accept our differences. We need to accept that we can live together, men, women, black, white, and it doesn't matter for me. What we have to look is what we have here, how we can accept. And maybe, if you don't mind, also the third point is to say, as a mom, I have 2 sons, and I think it's very important for us to think about the new generation, to think about the new, what we are going to leave for them. Wars, pandemics, terrorism, instability, and let's say bad health situation, conflicts. So what we have to do for them? That's why we need to start from the education. We need to start with good communication, good information, and to tell them that it's possible to accept each other. It's possible to live with others. And I think it's very important for us and for them. And I'm really very, I'm scared about the future. I'm scared because it's, I don't think we are going to leave for them a good heritage for our children and for our new generation. Because we, as, let's say, as human, we are always thinking about our ego. How I can be more powerful than the other one. How I can be the most powerful country in the world. Without thinking about that we have in different areas in our world, I mean, small countries, poor people, different situation, but it's kind of an ego everywhere. That's why I think we have to think for a better roadmap for the world, if I may say that, to think how we can change the mentality by education, by communication, by information, by also some resilience, and by also this exchange. I like this kind of exchange, so we can learn from each other. We can learn from our experience, and we can also, maybe if I'm wrong, I should have the courage to say I'm wrong. I'd like to learn from your experience, and maybe we can adapt. I mean, sometimes they're asking me why we cannot, I mean, copy the solution that you found in Tunisia in different Arab areas. I'm not here to give lessons to others, but we can adapt. We can take the best things from our experience, and we have people, I mean, the local, they have to find their solution. They have to look for their solution, and they are able to find the solution. It's very important because when you include, I mean, the citizens in the area, in one place, they can find solution. But we have to offer them the environment. We have to offer them the peace. We have to offer for them democracy, freedom of speech, and we have education. So they're going to be able to learn and to know and how we can change how they can change their country, or how they can change all the strategy. So this is what is very important. I mean, I'm not going to be so long, but I mean, what I learned from our national dialogue and my experience is, I'm not a politician, but I think I understood better the politician. Maybe for me, I'm more pragmatic as an entrepreneur. I like always short answers, but practical and concrete solution. I learned how to be patient, to listen, because we spent 1,700 hours just to listen to politicians and just to convince them. And also I learned that when people and the civil society, they trust on you, that you represent the voice of them, of this civil society, you can go forward and you can find solutions. I learned how I can forget my ego, my own life, my personal life, because for me it was very important to find a solution for my country. That's what I learned from my experience. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We had already so many concrete inputs, the role of civil society, of women, the importance of a long-term vision, and of course concrete ideas, and this is why we are also having this kind of discussion. And let me turn to Joanna Wronecka, looking at another complex context such as Lebanon. I mean, you were recently in New York briefing the United Nations Security Council on the overall situation in Lebanon. We know that the situation is complex and there is a country which is still trying to reconcile with its past after many years of civil war, with still many divisions inside. So based on your experience, what are still the challenges there, and what role can diplomacy and international organizations play?
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for this pertinent question. I will maybe try to focus on the role of diplomacy, because we are used to traditional diplomacy in the Middle East, focused mainly on the security issues. I think today we should try to help diplomacy to regain the place, especially as a mediator between different communities and also policies. It means that it's also a challenge because we have a lot of competition. I hope I will have the chance to speak about different, what I call names for diplomacy, like quiet diplomacy or creative diplomacy. But in a complex environment, it's extremely important to include all actors of the society into the dialogue, as my predecessor mentioned. The dialogue we should perceive as an exchange, but first we listen and we elaborate the creative solutions. So my experience from Lebanon, with a very rich history but extremely talented and brilliant people, is that the creative ideas bring fruits. Allow me to say that we should always focus on the young people, to encourage them to stay in the region and to bring good solutions to them. The same for young ladies, women, because with certain skills women possess, of course, I believe very much they can make difference not only in the sphere of media. I am impressed by, for example, Lebanese journalists because they are excellent, but also in the field of business opportunity. Allow me to bring a concrete also example how important is the cooperation between countries in the region. I think in the MENA region, among the Arab countries, this is a little bit lacking. We can use the energy sector as a, this is my experience from Lebanon, as a very good example, because this sector can open, when we are open-minded, a lot of windows. Probably you remember that 1 year ago, an initiative was proposed by countries in the region like Egypt, Jordan, but very much supported or initiated by US to use the cooperation in a difficult situation in the energy crisis to help Lebanon to have more energy, in this case gas and energy. It was quite creative and completely new agreement, already signed but not functional yet, with a completely new approach. I hope I can speak about other achievements in a moment. But the sector energy could be perceived as a sector of a lot of opportunities and new ideas. Maybe it's not purely diplomacy, but here we are dealing with economic diplomacy, and with the strategic thinking, economic diplomacy, it's also very, very important. I hope I will stay here and develop some ideas later.
Thank you so much. So again, the importance of an inclusive process. You were mentioning the younger generation as well. I think that this is really important, and inclusive meaning also involving the countries of the region. And I think that this is also an important aspect. just staying on the role of the international diplomacy, let me turn to Stephanie Williams. You have an extensive experience in Libya with different mandate, let's say, as special advisor on Libya to the UN Secretary General, and before that, special representative of the Secretary General and head of the UN mission. Libya, another difficult and complex situation. Libya is a country trapped in circles of violence, of political instability, on ineffective power sharing agreement. What are, based on your experience, the challenges there, and how diplomacy can help us overcoming some of them, at least?
Thank you very much, and thanks to MedDialogue and to the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I'm really pleased to be on this very distinguished panel and to be able to talk to you about Libya. And to say, let's start with the challenges. And there are three challenges, which are perhaps not new challenges, but which crop up now and again. So we once again, much like, or reminiscent, I would say, of the period in 2019, in the spring of 2019, we see again that you have a divided Security Council. And that does not help, resolution of the Libya conflict. You have, of course, the knock-on effects of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Bleeds obviously over into the Security Council, but then into other international processes which have worked on the Libya issue. You also, frankly, just have the fact that many capitals are focused on Ukraine, and that comes at the expense of other files, and so you have a limited bandwidth. You still have, and this has been a persistent theme in Libya, continuing interference from regional countries and players. You still have just blatant violations of the UN arms embargo with weapons pouring in, the continuation of the presence of foreign mercenaries and forces on the ground. None of this is helpful. Last but not least, you have a very truculent and stubborn ruling class in Libya, this post-2011 ruling class who are quite determined to maintain the status quo in the country, and because they directly benefit from this. This is all happening in the context of a rentier economy and a country which relies exclusively on one source for its revenue. So those are the challenges, but in challenge you also have opportunity, and so we have been able to maintain broadly the October 2020 ceasefire, and I think that's very important. And there is a sense among Libyans that they do not want to return to large-scale conflict, which does not mean that you're going to have these sporadic bouts of violence, which are very disturbing and which lead to the civilian casualties and deaths, and that's terrible. So we have seen these bouts of violence, but the maintenance overall of calm on the ground provides an opportunity for the United Nations, and there is now a new UN special representative who is busy doing his consultations, and I think he deserves all of the support of the international community as he sort of charts the way forward. There is, the military solution was tried in Libya. There was an attempt in 2019 with the attack on Tripoli to force a solution. It didn't work. And it's simply, I do not see a scenario where you can impose by force any solution in Libya. So therefore, diplomacy is the way to go. And international diplomacy must play a role. Multinational diplomacy. We launched a whole process as a result of the attack on Tripoli in 2019 and 2020 called the Berlin Process, thanks to the sponsorship of an incredible woman, the Chancellor of Germany, who agreed to partner with the United Nations. and with a host of countries and regional organizations, which play a very important role. And that has to be sustained, and the very intricate, interrelated tracks laid out in the Berlin process, which involve very much Libyans and which should be an inclusive political process, which should be a very intense focus on the economic track and how the revenues are managed and distributed, and as well as, of course, on the security track with an overarching focus on human rights and international humanitarian law. And I guess we'll come back and talk specifically about the United Nations role. But.
Of course, so thank you so much. And interrelated tracks and, of course, links between the different agendas. I think that this is really important, and thank you also for highlighting some opportunities in such a complex situation. Betul, let me go back to something Widad was mentioning before, which is the role of civil society. I mean, we are talking about different actors, and we know that diplomacy is no longer the sole preserve of state. We are talking about a multi-stakeholder diplomacy. So what role can really play the civil society in promoting peace and in the conflict resolution? I mean, what are, for instance, the tools that civil society can use, and are there any lessons to be learned or some concrete examples that you can give us also based on your experience and on your research on that?
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to MedDialogues. There has been a lot of research done on civil society, and it performs an important task, especially for peacemaking from bottom up. And there are basically 7 functions that it can perform in different contexts. And its effectiveness, of course, depends on the political and social context, and I'll talk about it in the Turkish examples after I list these functions. So the first function we can talk about is protection of civilians against violence, especially in escalation and re-escalation. We can talk about monitoring of human rights violations. We can talk about advocacy for peace and human rights. We can talk about socialization of values of democracy, but as well intergroup identity, developing intergroup identity. We can talk about intergroup social cohesion by bringing together people, diverse people together, especially adversarial groups. We can talk about facilitation of dialogue or intermediation. And then studies also mention about service delivery. But that's a function that can be considered as an entry point for peace-building activities. If I look at the civil society organizations working on the Kurdish issue in Turkey, I would like to highlight some of the functions that are good for peace, and that some of them were ineffective in terms of their outcomes. So protection becomes very important when peace processes fail, like the one we experienced in 2015, because conflicts, violence re-escalates. But because many of the areas where conflict takes place are considered by the state as high security areas, this function is really hard to be performed by civil society. So perhaps we need to rethink and should not be pushy about asking civil society to perform such function. Advocacy, when I look at the Turkish context, is most commonly exercised function among the civil society, which should not be a surprise, given that it's a country where political parties can be closed. But that also means that civil society becomes also a ground for politicalization of civil societies, and it becomes counterproductive. So when you close down political parties and civil society becomes something else, acts like a political party, then advocacy function becomes also counterproductive. So I believe there is a need to rethink about the message used in the advocacy. Like we have to look at the words we choose when we advocate peace, and the methods of advocacy to make this function more effective in spreading the words of peace. In-group socialization, I believe, is one of the most important functions that need to be performed by civil society. But again, in the context of Turkey, which is highly politicized, not only along ethnic lines, but also on sectarian political lines, this function is ignored by the civil society organizations. A study shows that, a study done in Turkey shows that many people in Turkey do not consider strong civil society as an important dimension of democracy. They think civil society organizations are not independent from the state, and the state does not see civil society as a partner in policymaking, and they're afraid of becoming a civil society member. So for this, we need more quality contact, not only between different social groups in Turkey, but also between state and civil society actors too. And that is also why social cohesion and intermediation become two of the most important factors for civil society. We need to bring together people from different sectors in these conflicting societies to talk about smaller issues rather than macro conflict itself. For example, rather than talking about the broad Kurdish issue, we should be talking about, for example, mother tongue in education in mother tongue. Secondly, there is a need to re-legitimize civil society actors who do invaluable work despite all the pressure and the polarization, social polarization that we see. So in sum, what prevents the effectiveness of these functions within the context of Turkish politics, I would say one, historical account of strong state, weak civil society that affects the perceptions of people and the functioning of civil society. Secondly, political polarization among the civil society organizations, and consequently, ghettoization of some of the civil society organizations. Thirdly, lack of conflict resolution skills and experience of most of the civil society organizations. They need to be more involved and learn and be experienced in conflict resolution. And fourthly, shrinking civil society space and fear of active membership to civil society organizations in such polarized contexts.
Indeed, thank you. Thank you. With that, civil society plays an essential role, but we are witnessing more and more societies which are polarized and where the space really for civil society is shrinking. And this is, of course, a huge challenge for our democracies and for our aim to achieve peaceful societies. We were talking about concrete aspects. So let me go back maybe to WIDED. I think it would be really interesting to hear more about your experience and what is the bargaining power of civil society. So looking, for instance, at what you've done, how did you manage to bring together the political parties to agree on the constitutional reform? What were the main assets that you used? In just a few minutes.
Yeah. From where I'm going to start? Yeah, in 2000, in 2011, I mean, we got this Arab Spring started in Tunisia in 2011, and we succeeded, I think, to get free and democratic elections in October 2011. 2013, we got our first political assassination. He was, an activist, a lawyer from the opposition. On February, 6th of February, and we got the second one, July 25th. He was a parliamentary person from the opposition also. It was a kind of a mess for us, having two political assassinations the same year in Tunisia, peaceful country, peaceful people. We were shocked, and we were afraid that we were going to lose our democracy, our transition, our new transition. So on July 25th, we got this idea to meet together. I remember I took my phone and called the General Secretary of the Union. I told to him, we need to find solution to Tunisia. We need to at least tell to politicians, please be away and let's find our way alone. And we met. I remember it was the Republic Day, it was Ramadan Day, and we met together and we agreed to sign the kind of communique paper that we wrote 4 or 5 points. And it was very difficult, at least for me, as an entrepreneur. I'm from the private sector, representing the private sector, to sign something with the union. And the government at this moment was afraid that the two big organizations in Tunisia, we have 150,000 members, and the union, I think, 1 million members. So for them, having the union and the business community together, of course, with the Bar Association and the human rights leagues together, so it's kind of going to be the first and powerful opposition in the country. And as I was the only woman there, they used everything to intimidate me, to push me to go away and not to be involved in such adventure. When we signed this communique, for us it was a kind of a way just to reduce this hostility in the country, to reduce the tension in the country. That's it. But suddenly we found ourselves, in front of all Tunisians, and they asked us, please go ahead. You put on your communique all the points that we were asking for. So please continue your role. And we found ourselves a kind of the voice. We were there as we were not prepared at all. But okay, we thought to ourselves, okay, we have this roadmap. What to do with this roadmap? We need the politician. That's why we invited the parties, the political parties that they were in the parliament at this moment. There were 22 parties, but 22, 23, 21 that they signed, and the party of the president at this time refused to sign this roadmap. After it became kind of roadmap. And it was for us how to make this happening. How we can invite the political party to come with us and to sign this paper, and how we can deal this dialogue. We are not from the. We are not elected by Tunisian. We are elected just by our members, and we started this. It took time. To convince them to sign this roadmap, and we refused to put any changement. I don't know it was good or not, but we said, okay, what we put there, Tunisian, they agreed on, so we have to keep this. And if you'd like to be with us, please just sign this point. And it was a kind of, it was a strong way to deal with politicians, and particularly for me, it was away from the politics and politicians. But I thought to myself, okay, let's go and just trust on yourself, and as you are doing something for the country, go ahead. And that's why they signed this roadmap, and it was a kind of marathon. Meetings, how to go from one point to another point. And we achieved this, after 6 or 7 months. And it was for us, it's a kind of way to find a solution, peaceful way for Tunisia. This national dialogue, it was a kind of platform. It's kind of, we got, because each one had to give his own point of view. And we worked, we chose the consensus. So it was for us, it was very important not to have, the parts that political parties that they had for example, the majority in the parliament, we said to them, you have just one voice, one voice, one voice. And we considered the consensus. And I think it was a soft way to agree on, and we refused voting on in each point. Because for us, we were looking for something for a peaceful way, and we were looking for something which is soft, and we can go, forward, and we can satisfy the Tunisian citizens. So,
okay, so let's say a collective effort, first of all, and then
from the civil society,
from the civil society, including the different perspectives and points of view. And this is how you, in the end, overcame the divisions also among parties.
That's it, yes.
So that's really a successful story.
Sorry, it's a long way, but to summarize in 4 points.
It's difficult to summarize it.
Yeah, thank you.
You were mentioning that you were the only woman in this quartet, so maybe let me go back to Betul. Maybe Betul, you can tell us a little bit more about the role of women in peace processes. You are also part of our network. You are very engaged on this topic. So, what role can women play in this process?
I don't want to start by saying this, but this question is usually never asked to men.
Yes.
Like what roles men play. So I don't want to talk about what roles women play, because they play the same roles that men do at the table. But even more, I did research with women negotiators, and found out that they play a crucial role when the talks are stalled. They use a lot of interesting strategies like humor, talking about everyday life, using ice-breaking exercises, and they just, talk about everyday life, and that tows the ice at the table. But instead of talking about, the role that they play, let's talk about what to do to include more women. I would say that we still need a lot of research on the needs of women and advocate more their cause, because a good intervention requires a good analysis. We have to still unfortunately show how women get affected differently from conflicts. Therefore, they have different needs and priorities and demands at the table. We need to develop a more holistic approach to understand the relationship between peace and security and development, because it's the women in their everyday life that get exposed to such violence, and then see the violence as interlinked. We cannot separate the violence, different forms of violence that everybody experiences, from the armed conflict that they get exposed to. Thirdly, I think there is a lot of emphasis on high-level representation at peace tables. Most of the time, the peace work is undertaken by women, which are invisible. And again, research shows that good, durable peace processes are possible when these high-level actors are linked to civil society actors. High-level women linked to women doing work at grassroots level. And a lot of research also shows that women leadership improve the health of children within villages. They even, their leadership also leads to less corruption. So, and we have to also, lastly, focus on different forms of inclusion too. We're always talking about negotiators, mediators, which are important. I'm not saying that they're not important. But there are other forms of inclusion to peace, such as national dialogues that Oded talks about, official and non-official consultancy, etc. So we have to ensure women's presence in all forms of inclusion, not only and lastly, but not least, We have to care more about who as well as how many. The participation of women per se does not guarantee that gender issues will be addressed. We should care more about including women who care about gender issues.
Thank you. Thank you, good point. And okay, we have Stephanie and Joanna here, so it's a good opportunity to go back also to the role of the international organizations and UN. And let's say multilateral tools which can really offer a platform for alternative solutions. So if we look at Lebanon, for instance, can you share with us some of your achievements and also shortcomings, and how do you see that the UN can really be an added value in this kind of context?
Thank you very much. I will try to be as concrete as possible. So in Lebanon, UN promotes the idea of a whole approach. We are very much engaged in the security issues. It's my role as a political mission, of course, but also in humanitarian and development assistance. The fact that in Lebanon we have at our disposal 26 agencies, plus UNIFIL, peacekeeping operation, and my political mission, I think it's quite impressive. And last time, during especially the Lebanese crisis, UN came with creative ideas. We elaborated an emergency humanitarian plan. We mobilized the international community to help. And finally, this year, I'm speaking about the humanitarian development dimension, we propose a new program of cooperation between the government of Lebanon and UN. We call this new Sustainable Development Framework. And new ideas came here again, more focus on well-being of the people, encouraging private sector, but also taking care about the very rich nature in Lebanon and ecosystem. My political role is very much related to the implementation of the Resolution 7001, because that is why the mission was established. But here again, I am just coming from New York when I briefed the Security Council. I can share with you a very positive impressions, because the whole international community is united and very much support, you know, the prosperity and good reforms in Lebanon. But the situation is not easy because of the crisis and particularities of Lebanon. So here again, we have to apply very creative approach, and I allow myself to call this creative diplomacy and invisible diplomacy. Invisible diplomacy for me, it's identifying eventual signals of tensions between different partners, because internally the situation is not easy. By identifying, I can prepare for my purpose, of course, a strategy, and later on build bridges and build trust, because a characteristic of diplomacy is trust and confidence. And my role is to convene difficult messages between partners in Lebanon and Israel, and come with even small solutions. And I think this is working quite well. Creative diplomacy, another example of my perception, is being active in the region, in the sense that contacting different countries in the region, we can promote the idea that Lebanon is also geopolitically a very important partner, and how to encourage the partners to look to Lebanon as a chance and also a solution. If you ask me about concrete achievements, because for our own analysis it's always good to see how efficient we are, I can tell you that thanks to excellent cooperation on the ground in Lebanon, We have a good achievement in mobilizing support for Lebanese army and internal security forces. Last year, I organized in close cooperation with France a conference to mobilizing the international community, and we elaborated a mechanism under my UNSCOL auspices. Now this will be implemented by the UN agencies, so we can build more professional Lebanese army. I hope this will be finalized at the end of this year. But we have another historical achievement in Lebanon, the agreement on the maritime boundary. After so many years of efforts, we should here emphasize the role of the United States and the mediator, Mr. Amos Hochstein. UN was very much involved from the beginning, but of course we try to create good environment and not to be visible, because of course the mediator played the role. But the efforts of different actors brought the concrete result. We should also mention the countries in the Mediterranean, because this is an example of also economic achievement, like the energy was used as a catalyst, as economic incentives. But with the involvement of energy companies, Eni from Italy, Total from France, and others, there are some new ideas also to replace another company. It was the Russian company Novotek. So how in a creative way the mediator, but in close cooperation with the member states. And I think UN can facilitate and mobilize efforts, and especially mobilize the international community on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and I'm sure that Stephanie can also add something on the role of the UN based on your own experience.
Sure. Look, I think in terms of the political process, the peace process in Lebanon, the UN is a sui generis role for the organization. It is considered to be the most neutral organization, but it acts obviously in concert and cooperation with countries and regional organizations. There are no soloists here, and so I think that must be sustained. The head of the UN mission acts as both the mediator and the head of the mission. And in the UN mission in Libya, not a lot of attention is paid to this in terms of the really good work that is done, particularly on the file of human rights and rule of law in this country, where there is complete impunity in terms of violations of human rights. And there are these unsung, I would say, soldiers in the UN mission who work quietly with people who run detention centers, armed groups, other actors, working on specific human rights cases, working with families, working with the victims to ensure that their voices are heard. That is incredibly important, that kind of work continues in Libya, that the work that is done on rule of law, as challenging as it is in that environment in Libya, where there's a plethora of arms that are not under the control of the state, and in fact, the semblance of the state has all but disappeared. That you have efforts with Libyans of goodwill, and there are plenty of them, and then this very critical outreach to civil society, to women, and to municipalities. All of this is done by members of the UN mission. Every day and throughout the country. And I think that's a very vital role that the UN plays.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm sorry we are running out of time, but we started a little bit late. So let me give you just one final word. We are here to discuss peace strategies. So what would be, in your opinion, let's say, the key element of a peace strategy? Stephanie, I will start with you.
Well, look, I think listen to the Libyans and lift their voices, and that is what we endeavored to do. We endeavored to build an inclusive political dialogue that did not just include the status quo actors, but that brought in other elements of society, particularly women and members of civil society. That's a lesson that should be taken forward, and whatever process is designed in the days and weeks ahead.
Thank you. Joanna, just one final word.
One final. With all talents in Lebanon, what is needed today is to rebuild trust so the people can work for the good and national interests of this beautiful country.
Thank you. Betul?
I would say start talking about peace with a small p, everyday peace. Women's and civil society organizations' everyday peace is both as a place of oppression and resistance at the same time. Top peacemaking is often gender blind and hierarchical, and working at grassroots level, talking about everyday peace, teaches one such values like empathy, care, listening, listening to understand different voices. And I would say focusing on small issues rather than trying to solve the big problem.
Thank you. Widad?
I think we are united by our common ambition for collective destiny. So we have to live in peace, we have to live with dignity, and respect each other. And this is very important.
Thank you. I think this is a perfect wrap-up of our session. So inclusive process, trust, everyday peace, and a collective effort. Thank you so much for this inspiring discussion. Thank you.